13 years ago, I visited a reconciliation center on the north coast of Ireland called Corrymeela. The center was founded by Ray Davey, who, while working as a chaplain for the British Army in North Africa during World War II, was taken prisoner and held at Dresden, where he witnessed the Allied bombing. After the war, Davey returned to Belfast, where he served as chaplain at Queen's University and inspired a group of young people to build a reconciliation community. The dream was realized in 1965, and shortly thereafter, the Troubles, or the conflict, intensified in Northern Ireland. So the center quickly became a safe space and a place of healing for many. When I visited the center for the first time, I spied a poster that said, "If the church has nothing to say about reconciliation, the church has nothing to say." Many of you know that I count that visit as a turning point in my own spiritual and academic journey. Our speaker today is the son of John Morrow, one of Davey's students and the original founders and early directors of Corrymeela. So Duncan Morrow grew up in an ecumenical community surrounded by people of great faith, great intellect, and great energy. While most of his peers were raised without having any substantive interaction with people unlike themselves, some having no interaction with people unlike themselves, Duncan grew up reading and studying and interacting with some of the great peace builders of Northern Ireland. Given where he lived and the ideas he regularly entertained, it's not surprising that he went on to earn his bachelor and doctoral degrees in philosophy, politics, and economics, first from the Queen's College, Oxford, and later from Edinburgh University. He was also an Austrian foreign student scholar as an undergraduate, for those of you contemplating programs abroad. His early university work and his research on churches and inter-community relationships landed him an appointment in 1998 as a Sentence Review Commissioner, which was the body responsible for implementing the early release of paramilitary prisoners under the Good Friday Agreement. He later spent over 9 years as head of the Community Relations Council, where he implemented, oversaw, and initiated programs that were designed to build integrated programs, structures, and schools to mediate difficult conversations, ethnic conflict, recreational rioting, and the continued sectarian violence and territorial disputes. He has served as an advisor for the Strategic Review Group for Parades. He continues to work as a parole commissioner, and he's been active in building good community models through various sports organizations, including the Football for All program. Currently, he's back to lecturing at the University of Ulster in Belfast, where he continues his research and directs the Center for Community Engagement. He lives there with his wife, Susie, and he has 3 grown or nearly grown children, and he rides his bicycle to work, but of course doesn't have the advantage of Santa Barbara weather to do that. He's a unique individual. He's someone born into the Troubles, yet also born into a faithful, scholarly, activist, ecumenical community. He's someone highly educated and well-published, yet also grounded in the everyday disputes and violence in a divided society. He's someone committed to peaceful and sustainable living, yet also regularly engaged with violent criminals. When asked by a journalist whether his beliefs impact his work in community building, Duncan replied, "The idea that people who don't deserve it are forgiven is a profoundly biblical notion, and without it, reconciliation doesn't actually mean very much." Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Duncan Morrow.
It's a bit like hearing your own obituary. First of all, Deborah and everybody else here, Chris, thank you very much for inviting me here. I have to say, when they say to you, would you speak at chapel, I had a slightly smaller, more religious environment, I have to say, in my head. I feel I should start with something which the Pope, the Dalai Lama is reputed to have said to the Pope, which is that before you speak to a crowd, you should spend some time taking the sense of your audience. And I have to say, it's a rough-looking crowd. One of the impossible scandals, perhaps the scandal of the gospel, for many good and obedient Jews in the first century, was the claim that God had come in human form. Since the days of the second commandment in the desert, every Jew knew that to name God, and even worse, to make an image of him, was to confine the confinable and to describe the undescribable. It was to impose a limit on the limitless, to own, to control, and to dominate. And yet, at the heart of the Christian claim is a simple assertion, which is, God is like this, like Jesus. This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. It's one of those things that's so obvious that we don't think about it. The reason Christians find it important to read and reread the Gospel is largely because that through conveying the story of a human life, Jesus, this is our closest glimpse of the one to whom all worship is due. This is the Imago Dei, the image of God. It's quite a claim, a person, on the surface at least ridiculous. Not for nothing did Paul describe it as foolishness for the Greeks, for which we might say the philosophers or the academics. Foolishness to the academics. Simply not possible. The claim of the Gospels is that Jesus doesn't limit God, but opens him up to us for the first time. Jesus does not come to tell us about God, but to show him to us. It is a story about the limits of telling, which is important to know in universities and colleges, which is what we are paid to do, to tell you. That is why so much of the Gospel text is taken up with references to blind people seeing for the first time. Almost every time it is unexpected people who see, rather than the ones caught up in the logic of the law. Famously, the difference between the Samaritan and the people questioning Jesus is that the Samaritan, the non-believer, sees and does, while the religious leaders argue and talk. Go and do likewise. Jesus comes not to talk about God or to do the will of some separate, controlling, bloodthirsty Superman in the sky. No, Jesus is God with us. This is God acting in the world, and he lays down his life in the face of huge hostility from the people like us. Religious leaders, political leaders, and a crowd whipped up into a frenzy of anger and envy and jealousy and desire. And it is a scandal. It turns everything we've taken for granted upside down. Everything is about revealing. In not defending himself from the crowd, we see that it is God who is killed and we who do the killing. And we are offered the forgiveness. In showing us who God is, he shows us who we are if we want to see. Sometimes a pack of wolves who kill the innocents and feel good about it and build our community around it. And he offers us a way out by accepting the invitation to follow in spite of all. And we call that forgiveness. By seeing who we are and who he is, called repentance. And by stopping the violence and living now free of the need to destroy others, called conversion, all to save us from ourselves. In order to show us, to reveal to us who we are and who God is, he is forced to go to the ultimate place, to be the sacrificial lamb. It is all about revealing. It is all about showing, not telling. Telling can only come after we have seen. The Gospel reveals this God as love without limit. The story of God with us is the story that, until we see just what it means, being willing to die at our hands rather than return evil, really is true, we will never believe it. On the cross, Jesus comes to show, to reveal who God is, endless love and forgiveness, and set that in contrast with who we are. Even though we think we are in the good crowd, we find ourselves actually children of power and violence. And it's only when our victims are revealed to us that we see it differently. And then we are called to follow him in the belief that this is our way to being truly human. The paradox revealed in the Gospel is that it is only through taking up our cross of self-sacrificial service to one another, through following him, that we'll be saved from wasting our possibilities and that we might find truly eternal lives. This is our gateway to becoming what we might be, truly human persons, children of the God of love only, the God in whom there is no violence and who will go to the ends of the earth to find even the most worthless of his lambs. The claim at the heart of the gospel is that peace is not a thing, not something to be made, but something that is given to us when we follow this Lord. It is always and everywhere available, a gift which we receive immediately if we choose to follow this pattern of self-sacrificial, non-judgmental love, which is true even unto death. Peace is the gift of walking in the light of a new certainty that all appearances to the contrary, this love triumphs even beyond and over death. We do not need to try, we do not need to talk. We see, we follow, and then we maybe tell. And we fall, and we fail, and we get back on the wagon, and we maybe tell too. Ever since Jesus, the history of the church is trying to figure it out, not trying to get it right. Because what is scary is how different the gospel is from everything else. The gospel contrasts Jesus on one side and everyone else on the other. Difficult as it might seem, the gospel writers see something very radical and very scary. It says that all of our power systems, all of them, are in the crowd following a different Father, in which peace requires getting rid of the troublemakers. The scandalous truth about violence in the gospel is this: it is about us. The point of the gospel is not to condemn the Jews, as too many Christians have catastrophically believed over the years, but to show that in the end, in fact, even the best of human cultures, Rome and the Jewish religious authorities in this context, gang up together to defend themselves against Jesus' searing insight into the core of their power. And it's sometimes the best of us who resist the insight of our belonging to violence most violently. And we must now live in the world of the uncertainty this creates. The claim is that there is violence in this world to which all of us belong, and then there is the offer of love, and we can and must choose. How do we be peaceful in a world of violence? Above all, how do we be humble about our own participation and find a way to follow this lead? The lesson is not that our attempts at order are wrong, but ultimately it won't be enough. Peace in the gospel has to be done. Offering one another bread and wine, washing one another's feet, remembering every day the people who have been broken to make it possible, and taking the unearned and unjust consequences of violence and loving in return. Tragically, it appears that it is in the suffering rather than in the retaliation that we can show the truth about love, not just talk about it. What drove Judas mad was that he couldn't believe that this, rather than politics, was the truly transformational, creative act through which the world might be saved from itself. It's all about revealing. At the heart of the Jesus story in the Gospels is the realization that talking and telling about peace won't be enough. About halfway through the Gospel, it becomes about walking to Jerusalem, not talking to the crowd. Show, not tell. Walk, not talk. The whole thing works not by opposition, not by counterculture, but by creating such a stark, indeed shocking contrast with all that goes around it, that its enemies simply implode on their own contradictions. Because by revealing himself, he also reveals who we are, and we hate it. The paradox of the Prince of Priests is that he provokes a huge violence of rejection and denial. For us, the first step, therefore, is to be honest. We belong to this. The Hebrew Bible, our Old Testament, has been on about this for generations. One of the problems of being post-Jesus in time is that we've absorbed just enough of the Bible to know that we should hide our bad side. And one of the great reliefs of the Hebrew Bible is the honesty and candour. Read your Old Testament, with which it acknowledges that our reaction to violence isn't love, it's hatred and bitterness and a deep desire for revenge. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land, says the psalmist in Psalm 137, and then he goes on. And if this isn't shocking, I don't know what is. Daughter Babylon, doomed to destruction. Happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your children and dashes them against the rocks. Jesus knows all about this, and he knows that for as long as we feel righteous in our anger, as we so often do, we will quickly understand our desire for revenge as normal and as just and indeed necessary. So he does not judge us in our violence. He offers us another way, a community of loving service, compelling and searing honesty, and the evidence of joy and freedom that result. This is the way, the truth, and the life. The downside is that part of the unavoidable journey is that in seeing this, we will also meet our own participation in violence and vengeance. The problem with Jesus is not that he exposes obviously bad people as needy and forgiven, but that he exposes the obviously good people to exactly the same conclusion and judgment. The world, we, hate this exposure. It exposes our self-satisfaction as delusion. It establishes a new equality between the good and the bad, not based on past action, but on a new division. Between those of us who accept and live out of forgiveness and those who cannot. And this is a new division between heaven and hell. Those in heaven were not good, they are grateful. They are free, but they are free because they are dependent on grace. The scandalous claim of the gospel is that we all belong to violence, and it is only when we acknowledge it, when we accept the possibility which following Jesus and accepting his forgiveness gives us, that we can move through the gate. The reading today and the preceding chapter lays all of this out incredibly clearly. At the start, Jesus lays out what has to be done. This is before we got to the reading. Drive out demons, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who are outcast, and it has to be done for its own sake, not for reward. And then he moves on to warn, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. And that for doing the things Jesus asked, you will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. Even worse, you will be hated by everyone because of me. The background to all of this violent reaction, the origins of the hatred, lie in the searing power of the truth it reveals. Somebody doing good in the midst of this world shows up the rest of us for who we are and strips us of our myths. Truth showing is the problem, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, as the text says. By the time we get to the start of today's reading, Jesus is only at the summing up of the discussion. Don't suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I didn't come to bring peace but a sword. Shocking language, maybe. But I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Now, to be really clear, I don't believe that Jesus is saying, go and kill your relatives. What he is saying is that the word of peace has an unbelievably explosive effect on who we are and how we are in the world, even for those close around us. It not only makes things possible, it breaks things up and exposes our associations and each other. And we don't like it. In fact, we don't like it so much that we try to hide it. In his novel, The Karamazov Brothers, Dostoevsky writes a famous chapter about a grand inquisitor who argues that the effect of Jesus is so explosive that the religious authorities have no alternative but to keep it under wraps. The secret has to be kept from people by the few in the know. The burden of religious leadership is to carry the secret and keep the show on the road. But in this verse, Jesus lays it on the line. Offering forgiveness and exposing participation in violence is the only way to peace, but it's not popular. Indeed, it makes people violently angry. The message, and indeed the messenger, may well be rejected, violently and intimately, and it appears that only when it is rejected that its internal truth becomes unavoidably visible. The slightly better news is that we live after Jesus, and because of Jesus it has already happened, and we do not need it to happen again, hopefully. You probably came here expecting me to give you a lecture about Northern Ireland, and that indeed will come later today. But in talking about the gospel, I've also been talking about Northern Ireland here. I come from a community which has been divided within itself because we've not found a way to stop trying to get rid of our fears, except by getting rid of the people of their, or at least of their system that we blame for our problems. Our identities, who we are, have depended on defending ourselves against our enemies. We are not them. They are the bad guys. We are the people who have to defend ourselves. Our violence is just. As violence has begotten fear, though, so fear has meant we've got to be violent. And even as we polarise along our well-worn grooves, established scandalously as Protestants against Catholics, Christian against Christian, British against Irish, we converged on the same conclusion. We agree on who the problem is: them. If only we could rid ourselves of them, we would be free and pure. Peace depends on violence, on getting rid of them. And because it is good violence, it is not violence at all. Our greatest resistance, indeed the great taboo, is the great secret. The problem is not only them, it is also us. That's what Jesus tells us. The problem is not them, it is also us. Peace will come only into the world when there are more people who know that without following love, we are all part of the problem. We cover up our participation by pointing out that we're only struggling after noble ideals: freedom, justice, peace, truth, but we hide from ourselves that we have used these noble ideals as justifications too. Once we know that they are the origins of violence and we are only its poor victims caught with little choice, then our violence can remain visible to us forever. I live in the middle of a community where thousands of people have been killed and nearly everybody believes themselves to be innocent, even those who carried out the acts. They are the cause, and we are the only respondents. We are right, and they are the aggressor. But worse is to come, because we are the abused, and they are the abusers. There can be no just peace, except that we win. Those who promote a peace between the abused and the abusers are liars and are promoting injustice. Peace is treason, and violence is heroism. Of course, this could be misunderstood. This is not a pacifist diatribe. We have to wrestle in the real world. In our world, the hard choices about when and how to confront and stop violence have not stopped. Some of the most influential Christian leaders of our time, I think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, have struggled, come to the conclusion that only by killing Hitler could he save millions. Ray Davy, the founder of the community in which I grew up, had his moment while serving as a soldier in the British Army, indeed as a chaplain, who happened to be chaplaining as a prisoner of war when the Allies, the good guys, and I have no doubt whatsoever they were the good guys, bombed the city of Dresden in which he was doing his chaplaincy. And 45,000 women, children were burnt in a town which had no military meaning that night. That was the good guys. Nobody, but nobody, and Ray Davy not among them, did not ever believe that participating in World War II was not essential. What he also knew was that it was not enough. We happen to live in a very important time, which is getting very short. Our technology is rapidly moving us to the point where the option of using limited violence to control greater violence is disappearing on us. As a consequence, ultimately, we will not be able to reach peace, think of North Korea, by enforcement. Peace will have to appear. Peace requires actions of forgiven people, loving in response to their own forgiveness and refusing to go down the road of rejection and crucifying others in the name of righteousness. Unless we follow it, and soon, there is a real risk that we will all be lost. And the bit we probably still don't want to hear is that it is also about us. In recent years, there has been some progress in Northern Ireland. We've begun to acknowledge, in private at least, that not everything that was done in our name can be justified. Sometimes even accepting it seems to me to be tantalisingly close. The paradox is, of course, is that if we could find and acknowledge the truth about our own participation in violence and evil, we might find the doorway to true solidarity and community. Humble people who know we've fallen short but have been offered a new beginning. To find another shore, we have to find not only the theoretical, but the literal and immediate meaning of Jesus' words. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Only if, and only if, we can own our own participation in justice, can we face peace with our abusers and find it just, and can our abusers face their own abuse. Peace is a journey of contrition and forgiveness and of conversion to a truth which we can hardly bear. And we and they will probably continue to resist it. And we and they will continue to fall short. But the message of peace has explosive results. But it is the only way.